Hi, I'm Bob Carey with National Defense Committee, and we're happy here to be on FedNet today. With me today, I have Representative Mariannette Miller-Meeks, Chair of the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Health, and Shannon Hough, the Executive Director of a Wisconsin-based veteran organization called Shield of Sisters. We're going to be talking about what the VA is doing in order to be able to treat veterans, what the Department of Defense is doing in order to be able to address military sexual trauma, and what a Trump administration can do in order to be able to make sure that these things get reformed and get reformed quickly. Representative Miller-Meeks, I was heavily involved in the establishment of the Community Care Program that came about from the Mission Act in 2018, and I helped. I was heavily involved in advocating for the establishment of the Community Care Program. And for our viewers, that's where the VA can't see you and provide you timely care in a quick enough time, then they will pay for you to go out into the community and get a private sector doctor that the VA will pay for in order to be able to, in order for you to be able to get your health care done, because the VA doesn't have enough clinicians. There's been a lot of changes between the Trump administration and the Biden administration on how this has been brought into effect. And what have you been seeing from the Health Subcommittee with regards to how the Biden administration is treating community care?
Well, Bob, as a fellow veteran, let me first say thank you and Dr. Rowe, Representative Rowe, for the Mission Act and community care. I have long felt that, especially when we had the peace dividend from the Cold War and we changed from a large active duty service contingent to half active duty, half reserve, half National Guard for our total military strength, that those individuals, those veterans, especially when they're deployed, they don't go back to a post or a base. They go back to a community.
Right.
And they may not have a VA hospital near them, so they ought to be able to receive care in their community. They don't have that support group of a post or a base in a large military service community. So I felt that under the Trump administration, we knew prior to this that there were veterans who were dying, trying to get into a VA, could not get into VA, were put on waiting lists, months for surgical intervention for cancers. And because of that, you all helped to put in place the Mission Act and community care. And so I came into Congress in 2021 not anticipating that this would be an issue. And what I found, especially as the chair of the Health Subcommittee, so I was 2 years on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, but then in 2023 became the chair of the Health Subcommittee, is that the VA doesn't want to implement or execute community care or the Mission Act. Now, certainly, we want veterans to be able to get the excellent care. Our veterans in Iowa like their VA facilities. And if they can get excellent care and if they can get in a timely fashion, then certainly we want them to be able to receive care at the VA. But if they choose to be in their community, and as a doc, I was a community provider.
You were an Army doctor, correct?
Army nurse, and then in the reserve as a doctor in a community. I did cataract surgery on veterans, took care of their glaucoma. So if they're more than 40 miles away, if they can't get in, then they ought to be able to receive care. Mm-hmm. It was stunning to me to find out when we held a hearing on residential mental health care and substance use disorder. The VA did not consider that to fall under the Mission Act.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're in extreme and you're suicidal and you need to get in for residential care, by gosh, you ought to be able to get in right away.
I had a case in Texas where someone was living in El Paso, an alcoholic with an active alcoholism, substance use disorder. They wanted to send him to an inpatient treatment in Houston. They wanted him to drive with an active alcoholism problem from El Paso over to Houston in order to be able to go into a substance use disorder. And it seems to be so much about the issue that the purpose of the VA is to protect VA jobs, not protect veteran health.
Well, that's the thing that's been so discouraging, at least they wanted him to go in the same state. Sometimes it's another state or it's another VISN entirely, and the purpose is to get care. I don't care where that care is. And so we've had these hearings. We put forth a bill. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle did not vote for it, but it said if a veteran needs residential mental health care or a veteran needs to have residential substance use disorder care, that they have to be seen within 10 days. Now, we're talking residential, and a lot of what I heard of was, well, this will prevent people from going to get telehealth. If you need residential care, it's not telehealth.
Right.
It does not apply. For regular mental health care, for follow-up, telehealth visits are fine. I encourage that. I'm part of those doctors in Congress who are trying to, get rid of to exempt the waiver that was put in place during the pandemic so that you could have telehealth in Medicare and other, but it's not, telehealth isn't going to be good for everything.
Right.
So that's the thing that's been most discouraging. When we've had oversight, the VA is telling us that, of course, they're abiding by the Mission Act. Well, they certainly weren't when it came to residential, and they admitted it. But I can tell you, when I meet with veterans groups, whether it's Wounded Warrior Project, Purple Heart, Disabled Veterans of America, American Legion, VFW, it doesn't matter. All of the veteran groups will tell you that they're having difficulties getting access to community care.
Right.
So it's one of the things that, with your help and with Shannon's help, we need to continue to push the VA on. The other issue that I've found discouraging is that the VA got a huge influx of money. From 2021, 2022, there were huge budget increases, appropriations increase, then a large appropriation increase for the PACT Act. And I have been steady in my conversations with Secretary McDonough and with Dr. Elnahal that money should be
The
going
Undersecretary for Health.
Yes, the Undersecretary for Health. That money should be going to providers, to hire providers, to bring people in, whether they're doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs, all of the level of providers. That should not be going to bureaucrats' salary. And what did we hear a month ago? Up to 50,000 bonuses for people in the bureaucracy, in the administration, but we can't hire docs and nurse practitioners. It's unconscionable. When we're appropriating money for care, that should be going to care, not to bureaucrats. We don't need more administrators. We don't need more bureaucrats. We need people on the ground delivering care, getting access to veterans, whether it's mental health care, whether it's PTSD, whether it's substance use disorder, whether it's cancer care, or whether it's military sexual trauma.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we will stand united with you in order to be able to try to get that done. Shannon Hough with Shield of Sisters, a relatively new group here in Wisconsin, but growing quickly, working on the issues of military sexual trauma. What are the biggest issues that you see, especially with female veterans, but male veterans too, when they experience military sexual trauma, and what the response is from both the Department of Defense and when and the response when they get out with the Department of Veterans Affairs?
Well, the first thing we see is the victim is not reporting because they feel like they're going to be ostracized. Usually they're shipped out of their unit, which they are, we're all very much into our units. That's our family, so we're shipped off to different locations. Fear of retribution, fear of not being believed. So one of the biggest things we need to do DOD-wise is really listen to our victims and decide that we're going to do more for them. But we also need to look at the person who's doing the assaulting and actually hold them accountable, hold the chain of command accountable, and really stop the betrayal that we see. Throwing 2,000 psychologists at this to work on mental health in the military isn't going to change the fact that there's sexual assault going on.
And as I understand, the psychologists that the department wants to hire is not to assist the victims,
correct,
but to assist the perpetrators.
It's to assist prevention.
Okay.
Which
is important.
We already have programs in place.
Yeah, right.
So what they really need to do is look at our recruiting standards and decide we've lowered our recruiting standards so much to meet those goals and the quotas that we need that we're not looking at the quality of recruits that we used to. As far as the VA, they recently decided that everyone who has experienced MST, regardless of status, can go to the VA for help. But that just perpetuates the betrayal. They don't want to go to the VA and tell their story 100 times. They don't want to go to the VA and get told, well, here's some PTSD counseling, because combat PTSD and military sexual trauma PTSD are totally different.
Right.
And then the claims, taking 2, 3, 4 years after you've told your story 50 times. is just ridiculous. You know, living your trauma constantly until you get your claim through, until you get the resources you need. And that's why programs like Shield of Sisters need to be in existence, because we help bridge that gap. You know, we work very closely with the VA here in Wisconsin. We actually have a very great relationship, and I'm very happy about that. But we can take anyone, whether they're dishonorably discharged, other than honorable, reserve, active, guard, whatever. And until we start touching all of those, both VA and civilian resources, we're not going to fix the problem. There's over 9,635 women in Wisconsin alone who have filed VA claims, and I can tell you...
For MST?
For MST.
Holy cow.
9,635 that have filed claims.
So if I can follow up on that a little bit, Shannon. So we certainly did in 21 and 22 pass legislation related to military sexual trauma, and also related to suicide, mental health issues, that you know, you can seek help, that the chain of command should not hold that against you. But the two other points I want to make, and one is that what message does it send to women or men who have been sexually traumatized or undergone military sexual trauma when the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion at the VA was actually sexually harassing their own staff?
Yeah.
And they were given a pass. Yeah. So Secretary McDonough, whether he knew or didn't know, the emails clearly showed that the supervisor, that these three individuals all knew each other. The female supervisor didn't do anything to the two males, and she was reassigned to another location in the VA, allowed to go into a promotion. One of the men was allowed to retire. The other man was also transferred. What does that say to women if the office that's supposed to handle sexual harassment, and I read in the hearing, a zero tolerance policy, what happens if they're just given a nice soft landing? What message does that send to women or men? Which I think is horrible. Absolutely.
You know, I read constantly, Admiral so-and-so, General so-and-so, Colonel so-and-so, reassigned. We had a colonel who was putting cameras in dressing rooms, and they took him out of his ROTC unit and sent him to another one so he wouldn't re-victimize. So, you know, MST is a moral injury. You know, we're starting to talk a lot about moral injuries, and every time we have to retell our story or someone's not punished, it's a re-victimization. It's just another nail in the coffin on that moral injury, the betrayal that we'll never get back. I was assaulted 30 years ago in the Navy. I had an extremely high security clearance. I wasn't allowed to get counseling. So when I finally decided to get help, this is where Shield of Sisters came in, because I was like, I cannot believe we're still dealing with this. I thought I was the only one, and there's a lot of women out there and men that feel like they're the only ones. And until we start really pushing this agenda, and you know, the administration, new administration, takes over and says we are going to start prosecuting, we are going to start using the UCMJ to its fullest extent, this is not going to change.
Well, and I think you had, you know, your comment about Shield of Sisters. It's so often that there are veteran advocacy groups who really are that intermediary and really assisting people. We have great, you know, organizations on the ground in Iowa, as you do here in Wisconsin, that really are helping veterans. They don't have to tell their story. They don't force them to tell the story. They don't have them go through question after question that they've repeated a million times because you're trying to fill in an electronic health record. They just sit there and listen when the person is willing to open up. And then the third point I wanted to make, especially as it comes into military sexual trauma, PTSD. So we've been having hearings on health committee and roundtables, and this, you mentioned Representative Luttrell. So on emerging breakthrough therapy, so psychedelics, you know, MDMA, psilocybin, and how beneficial they can be. I've talked to Juliana Mercer, who had military sexual trauma, and how this assisted therapy was able to help her. And you know, Representative Luttrell has the same story. So we need to think outside the box on how we can treat individuals, how we can get them past that trauma, and what assistance. So we are pushing the VA. They're doing research, they're doing pilot studies. One is at the Brooklyn VA, but we're actually hoping to make this system-wide. And instead of the ketamine centers of excellence, which do have ketamine has addiction potential, and also increased dosages, that perhaps, a very intensive assisted therapy with MDMA, not for everybody, but certainly is better than on the myriad of antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety medications that we put people on, which have significant side effects, and we just keep changing the dose or upping it or adding a new medication.
Absolutely.
So what specifically, Shannon, on MST, what specifically could a Trump administration do in order to be able to address, to hit the ground running as soon as they come in January 20th of 2025?
Well, like I said, one, force the DOD to use the UCMJ to its highest. There's legislation that's been pushed around about letting us file our claims back as far as the day we got out of the military. Look at that. I mean, we need to ensure that our survivors, I don't like the word victim, our survivors are not re-victimized, that we're not constantly waiting 2 years for a higher level review because we went to the VA to work on our claim and we asked for a female counselor and we get a male counselor. Like, way to listen to me, right?
Right.
Listen to the victims. We have a story, and the betrayal that we feel needs to stop. We need to start holding the assaulters accountable. We need to change our recruiting standards. We need to hold the VA to a high level of, we're going to treat these women and men, sorry. we focus on mostly women as shield assisters.
Right.
We need to ensure that every level of care they need is met. Don't just put them in these programs with men who've been shot at and women who've been shot at. It's a totally different kind of friendly fire, and it's not friendly.
Right.
We raise our hand to protect and defend the Constitution, and we're not protected and defended. And, quit punishing them. Quit sending them to different units. Quit kicking them out. Look at what they're doing. Their alcohol abuse increases, their weight increases, their health decreases. Start looking at these and beef up your programs and ensure that people who have been assaulted are on these panels, are in the VA, and say, this is what I needed. This is what my sisters and brothers need. And that's what the Trump administration needs to do. And
Shannon, you brought up something, and this may be sensitive to some people, but I'm going to bring it up. And you mentioned about a woman who had military sexual trauma requesting a female counselor. And I'm thinking of the entire push by the Biden administration, and I think one of the things that will change under a Trump administration. What about a woman who has undergone military sexual trauma, but is put in housing or placement with men who are identifying as women? Isn't that just re-traumatizing these women? I hear it every day from the women we help. Our participants are like, please don't ever. Because when we do our workshops, we do 3-day workshops in Airbnbs. It's only women that identify as women that are women that were biologically women.
Yeah.
Because the VA is the VA, the DOD, the entire Biden administration is forcing to be recognized and treated as a woman, even if you're a biological male. And we see this in prisons, we see this in halfway houses, substance. I mean, I've visited with these places, and they're very concerned that they will be forced, women's shelters, domestic abuse shelters. And there are women in the military who have had military sexual trauma who will go to those centers or leave a spouse. And we're just re-victimizing, re-traumatizing these women, and that will change under a Trump administration, I feel. Which is so important because, regardless of your beliefs on that, we're nonpartisan, but you can't re-victimize them, you can't re-traumatize them. Women have a very specific need, and, it's got to be met. And we're the largest growing demographic in the veteran space, and people need to start listening to us.
Well, Chair Miller-Meeks, in our last 4 minutes, what do you believe the VA or Trump administration can do in order to be able to address some of these problems you see with community care access?
Well, I think first and foremost, the Trump administration has been very supportive. As you said, this is something they started. I think that they will, number one, who they put in as Secretary of the VA is going to make a difference. And that person, my advice to President Trump is when you're vetting individuals, make sure that person supports the Mission Act and community care. That's first and foremost. And then it's putting people into the VA system, filling those positions, making sure all the way from the top to the bottom that they support community care access, that they support a sexual identification rather than a gender identification, so that when it comes to military sexual trauma, people aren't re-traumatized again. But I think you will definitely see things change in the Trump administration, and I'm looking forward to a change.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Shannon, can you give us your website address so in case there's anyone that wants to be able to reach out, they can?
Absolutely. It's www.shieldofsisters.org.
Great. And for Iowa residents, is it Miller-Meeks at congress.gov?
Official would be miller.meeks@mail.house.gov would be my official email address.
Great, great. Thank you very much, and really do appreciate you being here today. Hope you have a good week. Looking forward to a great convention here and a lot of good chances for discussion. Really do appreciate you all being here today.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure.
ma'am.
Thank you.
And we're back. I'm Bob Carey with National Defense Committee. We're here at the Republican National Committee convention at the Fiserv Center. We just had a great conversation with Representative Mariannette Miller-Meeks, chair of the House Veterans Affairs Health Subcommittee. She's from Iowa. She's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, Medical Corps, our Nurse Corps, and then also a doctor on the outside. And she's been doing great work over at the House Veterans Affairs Committee to make sure that veterans get access to the health care they need. I'm also here with Shannon Hough, the executive director of a relatively new group, Shield of Sisters, that helps here in Wisconsin, that helps female veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma to be able to get the help they need and to be able to get the resilience to reestablish their resiliency and to be able to thrive in their culture. We talked a lot about community care and the access to health care, timely access to quality health care for veterans, and the problem that the VA seems to be more interested in making sure that veterans only use VA doctors and don't use doctors on the outside, regardless of how long it takes to see a VA doctor. And one of the issues we talked about was mental health, and the mental health that the females and males, but mostly females that experience military sexual trauma have. One of the things that National Defense Committee is working on is the relationship between combat exposure and suicide risk and mental health. One of the things that happened in 2016, the VA does an annual report on suicide, and in 2016 they examined the suicide risk for those veterans who were exposed to combat in either Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere around the world. And what they found is that it's already established that the veterans have about 150 to 250%. Women have a 250% greater chance of suicide risk than their non-veteran counterparts, female counterparts, and men have a 150% greater risk of suicide than their non-veteran male counterparts. But what they found for the combat veterans was about a 5 to 6 time greater suicide risk just by being in combat. And you raised in our previous segment the issue of moral injury. Post-traumatic stress and moral injury are very closely related, and one of the biggest elements of moral injury is not only when a military person has done something they think they should not, or they did not do something they think they should have done, but when their superiors or the organization for which they does something that they thought was wrong or did not do something they thought was right. And I would think that with military sexual trauma, you talked about how that's such a family, a unit, especially a combat unit, has such a close familial bond that the feeling of betrayal would be even more pronounced. What do you see when you're dealing with these men and women?
I hear the word betrayal so much. Just that it's a betrayal of your family, assaulting you. It's a betrayal by your superiors and not backing you, not punishing the person who assaulted you. It's just, and I don't even think the word betrayal is enough. I don't know if there is a word that can explain what happens when you're assaulted in the military. We call military sexual trauma, there's different levels. The moral injury and the recovery from that is almost impossible. You really have to look at your mental health treatments. You have to look at deciding not to carry that trauma around anymore. You have to seek help and seek a bond. And you know what I'm finding a lot is in that betrayal, the bond of women who have been assaulted is stronger. You know, I have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 women text me constantly, you know, because they missed that bond that was created and then broken by the betrayal. So it's just a word I hear nonstop. And I don't think that you can ever fix it. And that's why MST is such a hard topic to work on, because it's almost impossible to fix.
With combat veterans that National Defense Committee does a lot of work with, one of the things, you know, we look at, we're trained upon the people that have been awarded Medals of Honor or Navy Crosses or Distinguished Service Crosses or Bronze or Silver Stars. And oftentimes the citations read about who, even after they are seriously wounded or even mortally wounded, continue to do their duty and not just, you know, take the out of saying I'm wounded, I'm done, and continue to fight. And so that culture becomes one of, it extends to minor injuries as well. I'm not going to the doc, you know, because I'll get grounded or I'll get med down, and you don't want to put that onto your compadres in the unit. How does that, you know, do you see a similar thing with military sexual trauma?
Well, it's twofold. Yes, you see that. You know, I'm still a soldier, I'm still a sailor, airman, Marine, whatever. I still have a job to do. I raised my hand. But you also have the problem of they're not going to believe me. What did I do to make that happen? So it's kind of twofold, but you never forget that oath. You know, even though there's betrayal there, you know, I hear so many, I didn't want to get sent to a different unit. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to lose my clearance, so I didn't say anything. So, you know, not only do we have a problem with, you know, the betrayal, the suicide issues, the, you know, wanting to stay with your unit, we have the problem of not reporting.
One of the things that, you know, we find with combat units is that culture of, you know, suck it up, embrace the suck.
Yeah.
It's tough to get across to these people. It is all right to not be all right.
Yes.
You know, I just graduated from about 2.5 years of mental health services myself, and I am so glad that I went through it because it helped me evaluate that. What is, you know, what can a Trump administration or society in general do in order to be able to make this more acceptable for the women that you serve?
They have to talk about it. You know, I can't tell you how many people I have talked to. They're like, oh, we didn't realize the problem was that bad, but we don't want our name on that.
Right.
You know, like even people who are going to donate stuff to Shield of Sisters, don't put our name on it. We're government contractors. And I'm like, what do you mean? We're military. You know, we have to normalize the conversation that this happens in the military, that there is assault, there is harassment, there is death because of assault. And we have to normalize these conversations so it's not so shocking, so that when you tell a brother at arms, you know, it's 1 in 3 women and they start crying, you know, we've got to change the conversation. It's got to be just as prevalent as PTSD, as TBIs, as anything else. You know, you put a title on it, start talking about it.
How significant is, when we think of military sexual trauma, it is easy to go to the worst situations, you know, the rapes, the assaults, but how significant and how harmful are the catcalls or the, you know, or the unwanted advances? You know,
I've unfortunately experienced both, and I handled my assault better than I did the harassment. And I could tell you stories. I was in a submarine unit, so you can imagine, young 18-year-old female. The harassment was horrific. You don't want to go. You want to feel as ugly as you can. You know, you start gaining weight, doing whatever you have to do, so you don't experience that. You know, I'll tell you, the first day I got to boot camp, my drill instructor said, well, are you going to be a mattress or are you going to be a B word? That was his first,
Holy cow.
you know, so, and you're like, what do you mean am I going to be, oh, you know, and so this is so prevalent, and it's just as harmful. It messes with your mind and your emotions. You're like, what, you know, why is this happening to me? Why is it, you know, why do I have to go to work? And, you know, it's supposed to be a zero tolerance, and it's tolerated. It's constant. You know, I mean, we've always had our hazing, and we've always done things, you know, joke around with our buddies, but this is a whole different level.
Right.
And it can be catastrophic.
If you could, if Shield of Sisters could ask for one thing right now, or one thing come January 2025, what would it be?
Talk about it.
Okay, talk about it. What do you want to know? What do you want to know about National Defense Committee, or what do you want to know about things that we're also working on in other organizations?
Well, you know, we deal a lot with claims. We help pass out resources for claims for MST, PTSD, and quite often we refer them to other VSOs and organizations. Is there another way to get your claims through? Is there another process we can do instead of just constantly dealing with organizations that might not be used to MST? You know, it might be something new to them. What are other ways we can work on our claims?
So, you know, the VA and many organizations will tell you that the VA disability process, and the VA disability process, your claim for your disability compensation, is separate and apart from the health care. You don't go, you know, the same people that provide you your health care don't make your determination on your disability claim. But you got to go through the disability claim before you can get health care. If you don't have a service-connected disability, you can't get health care in most cases. And so the issue becomes one of, you think it's going to be a non-adversarial process. The VA has this thing called a duty to assist, and they also have this evidentiary standard of as likely as not that your injury or your disability is related to service connection. But the problem is that it eventually becomes an adversarial process. You know, within the community, there is this attitude of, oh yeah, the VA, they'll just deny until you die. And so you talked earlier about how you have you put in your initial claim, it got denied, you asked for a higher level review, and you're waiting 2.5 years. I'm sorry, if they can't make, I'll give them 6 months.
Yeah.
If they can't figure out your claim in 6 months, then they should say, oh, you know what, you're approved. If we figure out, if we go through this process as we continue, and we find later on that there's reasons why you shouldn't be approved, then we'll stop it. Then you can go through the appeals process. But if they got 6 months, and that's the first thing that should happen. You got 6 months. If you don't get it done, then you start getting your benefits as you claim. They'll give a pretty big incentive to the VA to get their stuff together.
Yeah.
The second part is that you know, these VSOs say that they provide the services for free, these veteran service organizations, but these people still get paid, and they get paid by the dues of the members of these organizations. But what people also don't realize is that these veteran organizations, they get free office space, free office furniture, free computers, and they even get a va.gov email address so they look like a VA employee. They don't get a nationaldefensecommittee.com email address. They get a va.gov email address. And you go to some of these national organizations, national conventions, and you say, what is who's the number one person to have recruited new members for our organization? And I'm a life member of most of these organizations. I'm an officer in my local post in 2 of these organizations. And it is always the veteran, the claims assistants that are the number one. Because the first things they'll say to that guy or gal coming into their office is, have you ever thought of joining the National Defense Committee? And we don't do claims ourselves because we do mostly advocacy. And so I'm just going to use National Defense Committee as a name. But the poor kid thinks that they have to join up, otherwise they're not going to get the services.
Yeah.
So I've used many of these, there are organizations out there that call these consulting organizations claim sharks. I think that is completely wrong. I've used Veterans Guardian, I've used VetCom, I've used VA Claims Insider. Yeah, they charge me money. They either charge me a flat fee up front, or they wanted a portion of my future benefit. Like one of them wanted whatever increase I got for the next 5 months. And I was fine with that, because the process is so complex. I never knew what a higher level review was until I got my claim denied. And then I went in and I said, oh, I guess I need to ask for a higher level review with informal consultation. But the VA claims process is the only one where you cannot hire a lawyer to help submit your individual claim. You have to either submit it yourself, or you have to go through one of these veteran service officers. Every other federal disability claim, disability benefits, or Social Security disability benefits, you can hire a lawyer. The VA is the only one where you can't hire a lawyer. So there's a competition going on right now between something called the PLUS Act, which is going to allow many of these outside consultants to charge, and the GUARD Act, which is going to prohibit it. And it just seems to me that the people that want to prohibit them don't want any competition. It seems like it's more about protecting, one organization, one of the veteran service organizations made the mistake about 5-6 years ago of putting into their IRS form, and all the nonprofit IRS forms are public record, that they actually put in the value of getting all that free stuff from the VA into their IRS form, and it comes out to about $10,000 per year per veteran service officer, and many of these veteran service organizations have 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 so that's $10 million worth of benefits that one organization is receiving from the VA, but that's never accounted for. And so I said earlier, it oftentimes seems that the Veterans Health Administration's purpose is to protect VA healthcare jobs and not veterans' health. So too, oftentimes, this whole veterans disability claim system seems to be about protecting the position of these veteran service organizations, and not the ability of the veterans to file for claims. So, National Defense Committee, we're of the opinion that we need to allow lawyers in early, because right now you can't hire a lawyer until after your claim's been denied. So you put in your claim, it takes 9 months for them to review it, you get denied, and now you can hire a lawyer, and now it's going to take 2 to 2.5 years for your appeal to go through. I mean, we have set up the system for the veteran to be, disenfranchised.
Which is not what it says on the VA plaque.
Right. To help those who defended the country and are widow and orphans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't do that.
Right. So for anyone to think that it's not an adversarial system, and what do you need in an adversarial system? You need a lawyer. Yeah. You need someone that's going to advocate for you, just like National Defense Committee advocates on Capitol Hill for veterans and veterans benefits. The other area that I see this in is in gun rights. There's this program in the VA called the fiduciary program, and not many people know about this. But a lot of veterans who do own firearms will not seek the mental health care they need, for fear that they are going to be referred to this fiduciary program. And what the fiduciary program does is that any rating official in the VA and any healthcare provider can refer you to the fiduciary program. And it's not within the healthcare system, it's within the disability benefits system. And since it's your benefits, they say, well, you don't need regular due process, because all we're doing is going to assign a fiduciary to handle your benefits for you. The rest of your money you can handle yourself, but your VA benefits, we're going to handle those for you. But what they don't say is that when you're referred to the fiduciary program, the veteran has to prove their competence. Not the VA prove your incompetence, but the veteran has to prove their competence. And the veteran has 60 days to prove their competence. And if they don't, they are automatically, the presumption is that you are incompetent once you've been referred. And you can be referred by anyone, and you're determined whether you're competent or not by some bureaucrat. And so there's no due process. There's no judicial oversight. And but here's the kicker: once you're determined to be incompetent, you are then also determined to be a mental defective, and you are reported to the Department of Justice as a mental defective, and you're reported to the National Crime Incident System reporting system, and then the Department of Justice sends you a letter saying, "Oh, you are a mental defective, so you are no longer allowed to purchase or possess a firearm. You have lost your gun rights." So a lot of veterans, I mean, 45% of all veterans own firearms, and a lot of veterans say, "I'm not going to lose my right to." So they won't seek the mental health care they see, but veterans who are not within the VA's mental health care system have a higher suicide risk than those veterans that are in. And just because you bounce a check doesn't mean that you should be losing your gun rights.
Absolutely.
I mean, if that's the case, half of the people in the country who don't have more than $400 in their checking account should probably be put into the fiduciary system.
And they should maybe take away those check cashing things around all the military
Maybe,
installations.
So, if people want to find out more about what National Defense Committee is doing, we're at www.nationaldefensecommittee.com. Happy to, you can see the things we're doing. We're fighting for educational benefits. We're fighting for gun rights. We're fighting for access to quality health care, especially mental health care. And why don't you say again what the Shield of Sisters is and how people can get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to our website at www.shieldofsisters.org. My email is Shannon@shieldofsisters.org. And we're just out there really pushing the agenda that military sexual trauma, one, should not exist, but even if there was never another military sexual trauma incident, there's still thousands and thousands and thousands of women that need help. So that's what we do. We work on the trauma with them. We give them peer-to-peer support. We offer counseling resources. And we're starting to get a little bit into the advocacy because we're tired of hearing, all of these different military service members getting away with assault, which if they were in the civilian community, they'd be in jail. If the person who had assaulted me with what was going on with him had been in the civilian community, he'd got attempted murder. He got 6 months in the brig when he assaulted me. So we're really pushing that agenda. We just had a young soldier die last week. She was stabbed 70 times after a sexual assault in Fort Campbell. So, that's what we're out there doing. We're raising noise. We're using our voice because it's a group of sisters that shouldn't exist. We should just be sisters because we're military, but we have a different bond, and that's military sexual trauma.
Shannon, you're doing good work.
Thank you.
Good job, shipmate.
Thank you.
Again, www.nationaldefensecommittee.com and www.shieldofsisters.org. More than happy to help any of you that are out there that need help. Thank you very much to FedNet. Enjoy the time here at the Republican National Committee, and be safe in Milwaukee. Thank you very much.